Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Lawsplaining the Interwebs. I'm your host, Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. And as promised, here is the result, the final result of Meyer versus Waid, which is a lawsuit that was filed, I think, 2 years ago now, back in 2018, and may have had its genesis earlier in 2018 here on this very channel, where you can see I interviewed Diversity in Comics, Richard Meyer, about Jawbreakers and what was going on with Mark Waid. The next day, I did a legal analysis explaining possible paths to a lawsuit, including causes of action. And then sometime later, I think several months later, even maybe 5 to 6 months later, Richard Meyer did indeed hire a lawyer down in Austin, Texas, to go ahead and sue Mark Waid over defamation and tortious interference. This was in regards to statements that Mark Waid had made about Richard Meyer, calling him a white supremacist, saying he was affiliated with white supremacist groups, and saying that he threatened or published the personal phone numbers of comic book store employees who refused to carry his book. Now, none of these claims are true, including the claim about publishing personal phone numbers. That is not true. What was published, I believe, were actually, the store phone numbers available on Google of comic book stores and stuff like that. But that being said, that was the source of the defamation claims. The tortious interference with contract claim came from Mark Waid calling up Antarctic Press, a small comic book publisher that was working with Richard Meyer to do a store run of Jawbreakers. Jawbreakers was released on Indiegogo and was self-published by Richard Meyer. However, a follow-up run of Jawbreakers Lost Souls, I think, was going to be broken up into some smaller comics and released through Antarctic Press, and therefore, under their label, it would be able to get into major comic book retailers, local comic book shops around the country. So that was the idea. Mark Waid heard about this and then made phone calls to Antarctic Press to let them know what they were doing. He announced proudly that he did this on Twitter. He even had a really stupid interview on Bleeding Cool, where he talked to Rich Johnston about exactly what he said to the Antarctic Press people. And what it looked like was tortious interference, okay? That's what it looked like. That's ultimately what it was. And the result of that phone call was Richard Meyer having Jawbreakers pulled from Antarctic Press, which at the time was pretty damaging to him. Now, since that has happened, Richard Meyer sued. He created a GoFundMe, or actually Ethan Van Sciver, I should say, created a GoFundMe on his behalf for legal fees, ending up raising just short of $150,000. Mark Waid raised somewhere around $85,000. I felt like it was a little more, but maybe it was the $85,000 on his own GoFundMe, and the two went to a legal war. And it was a drag-out, very slow-moving fight over not a lot actually happening in the court case. They spent about a year arguing over whether or not the Fifth Circuit Court in Texas, the Fifth Circuit Federal Court in Texas, had jurisdiction over the case. Ultimately, they decided they did have jurisdiction over the tortious interference as it occurred in Texas, and over any statements that were made in Texas specifically. Mark Waid made some statements at a Houston, Texas Q&A session about Richard Meyer, and they had jurisdiction over those statements, but the court did decide that they wouldn't have jurisdiction over the online statements. So that is how that worked out. That was a year of fighting just to see if they could actually continue the fight. So that is where we actually left off. From that point, there was a discovery period, and then recently we have the announcement to drop the lawsuit, which I'll cover here. I have Bleeding Cool up literally only because it has a nice, convenient writing of the announcement. So that's what we're going to use Bleeding Cool for, is this announcement. It's not their intellectual property in any sort of way. It's just a very convenient way to see what's there. I will, of course, link the Bleeding Cool article in the description, and let me offer some mild criticism of it. It is devoid of content and is completely pointless. It shouldn't exist as an article, and it's a waste of everyone's time, just like the Bleeding Cool publication in general. Get wrecked, Bleeding Cool. You're terrible. All right, joint statement from Richard Meyer and Mark Waid. On September 19th, 2018, plaintiff Richard Meyer filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas against defendant Mark Waid that asserted claims of tortious interference with contract and defamation arising out of the intended publication of a comic book by Anarctic Press entitled Jawbreakers. Following jurisdictional discovery and motions practice, a First Amendment complaint was filed on July 24th, 2019. Since the filing of this lawsuit, Jawbreakers has been successfully published, and COVID-19 has significantly impacted the world around us. Upon consideration of all the circumstances, the parties have jointly decided that it is in the best interests of all concerned and the comic book community at large for this litigation to end, and Mr. Meyer has decided to voluntarily dismiss the lawsuit. Neither party has admitted any liability or responsibility, can claim to have achieved any victory, and both have agreed to assume their own fees and costs. With the dismissal of the lawsuit, the parties have executed a confidential agreement and have no interest in continuing this dispute in the public arena or anywhere else. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this because many people are speculating over what happened. There is some anger on the side of some of Richard Meyer's fans, purported fans. It's hard to say on the internet. There is, some jubilation on the side of Mark Waid's fans, and let's talk about that. Bleeding Cool mentions it, but let's talk about why there would be anger on the side of a plaintiff and happiness on the side of a defendant when a case is voluntarily dismissed. Because the plaintiff is bringing suit against the defendant, when the plaintiff decides to stop that action, the people who support the defendant will be happy that they will not be, that the defendant will not be subjected to a verdict of the court. A court ruling is an imprecise and ugly thing. It is a hammer or a hatchet. There are different ways to look at it, but all of them involve something big and nasty coming in to do the work, where oftentimes in our lives we would prefer something nice and precise like a scalpel or a very sharp knife. That is not the case with a judgment from a lawsuit. The court has very little nuance to its remedy. It's usually, here's a big award and it's over. All right. So that doesn't get to happen, or that doesn't happen with a settlement. And so with Mark Waid's supporters, they're going to be very happy that Mark Waid did not, in fact, lose the lawsuit, right? Whereas with Richard Meyer supporters, you're going to have people upset that they're not going to get the perception of justice that they wanted. What they wanted was a big court to come in and slap Mark Waid around until Mark Waid was calling him daddy, saying this is a bad action. You did a bad thing. You need to be punished for the bad thing. And in all honesty, Mark Waid did a very bad thing. And I will confidently say that Mark Waid did everything Richard Meyer said he did. He lied very specifically and very publicly about Richard Meyer. Mark Waid is a giant heaping pile of garbage. We know that from the lawsuit. It's pretty obvious. At any possibility, Mark Waid had to retract these statements or to offer some clarification or to even say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't have gone that far. He never did. Mark Waid's a huge heap of trash. We know that. Many people knew that before the lawsuit, and it was only reaffirmed in the lawsuit. However, there comes a point where finding out someone is a huge heap of trash becomes extremely, extremely expensive. And if we're putting ourselves in the shoes of Richard Meyer in pursuing this litigation, what we've got is, like I said, just shy of 150,000 raised, Probably somewhere in that ballpark, maybe more, maybe a little less in legal fees. I don't know the status of Richard Meyer's legal fees, but I can tell you that a year of litigation in federal court involving multiple depositions and motion practice gets really, really expensive really, really fast. And there is no reason to assume that this cost, anywhere significantly lower than the $150,000 amount. Maybe it did. I don't know. I don't know if Richard Meyer will be updating people on that. He has said that if there is any money left over, it will be donated to charity. But again, I don't know what his legal fees are. I can only surmise that they are significant. Okay, so that being said, at some point after 2 years and 6 figures of outlay, what you've got is an amended complaint and another potential 2 to 3 years of litigation ahead of you, which means another 6-figure outlay, potentially being a higher level of 6 figures than you've already paid, depending on if there are more depositions that need to be done, depending on the level of motion practice that Mark Waid was willing to engage in. Costs on both sides of this were going to go up very high, and resolution was a long way away. That being said, of course, there's the light at the end of the tunnel of the judgment. But what we have to look at is what Richard Meyer was actually looking at in terms of a judgment from the court. Remember, there are multiple aspects to litigation, there are multiple goals, and there are multiple results that occur both inside and outside of the courtroom. Outside of the courtroom, I think Meyer got exactly what he was looking for out of this lawsuit. He developed a large base of support from people. People realized what a huge scumbag Mark Waid was and still is. They have seen the comics industry for the nasty, nepotistic, incestual relationship that the mainstream comics industry is. And a lot of people, frankly, walked away and started supporting independent comics from people like Richard Meyer or Ethan Van Sciver or, any number of other creators out there, Raging Golden Eagle, that Umbrella guy. Lots of people have put out these comic books, Doug TeNapel as well, and people can go buy them. They don't have to go and buy the Caped Crusader comic books that are the same recycled intellectual property written by increasingly less talented people every single week. That has been going on for 60 years, 70 years for some of these properties. Superman was created a long time ago. So was Batman. So was Captain America. So were the Avengers. These were all created in different eras. And as our country has changed and society has changed, we have seen the perspectives of the creative staff change at a tune that is, in my opinion, out of step with mainstream America and the mainstream comic book audience, which is why we've seen comic books themselves and these new storylines that are coming out diminish in prominence, diminish in sales, and diminish in popularity, while we've seen things like the Marvel comic universe exploring older storylines from Marvel, or the DC stories exploring, again, older storylines from the DC timelines, being wildly popular and very, very successful, while the underlying comics that have fed the intellectual property for these movies wane. The movies are rising. So I think that is a reflection of just where the comics industry is, and part of that, I'm not crediting that to this lawsuit in any way before anybody gets any weird ideas about that. But part of that is the same sentiment as what's going into this lawsuit. People are starting to see the comics industry for what it is: useless. It is not helpful. When people want to see fresh, engaging content, they're looking everywhere else but these same tired storylines and same loved characters, but those characters aren't the same characters anymore. They're not the Batman of 1980 or 1970 or 1960, right? It's not the same Batman anymore. It's not the same Superman. They're being changed. And rather than create new properties that more appropriately can incorporate different ideas about America, about society, about the globe in general, rather than do that, they're trying to ham-fist these ideas into those old properties. That's enough of a rant about comics in general. I'm getting way off topic. The thing is, Richard Meyer exposed a bunch of people who follow him to the nastiness and ugliness of the comics industry, and that is a very good win from this lawsuit, in part from his just general creation on YouTube and his own comic book creations in part as well. So that is one of those goals that was achieved outside of the courtroom, and Richard Meyer did very well with it. Inside the courtroom, the prospects he was looking at for defamation, as the claims for defamation got whittled away on jurisdictional grounds by the court, the possible award for defamation goes down considerably. When you're down to just the statements made at the panel in Houston by Mark Waid, you can argue that those statements caused a lot of damage. That panel was recorded and broadcast to the internet, and those statements are echoed in statements on Twitter and elsewhere. However, the prospect of that being a slam dunk starts to diminish when you limit the jurisdiction to what was said specifically in Texas, rather than some of the potentially more damaging tweets made by Mark Waid against Richard Meyer that were broadcast to a much larger audience of Mark Waid's 100,000 plus Twitter followers. Okay? As that happens, and as those opportunities for defamation claims diminish, the amount of judgment diminishes significantly. And I'm not sure that people looking at this realize just how much defamation really matters in a case like this versus the tortious interference. Tortious interference is limited to actual economic damages caused by the interference. So what we're talking about here is however much money Richard Meyer would have made with Antarctic Press. Now, the alleged agreement between Richard Meyer and Antarctic Press, I believe, was a 50-50 split on revenue, but I'm not sure if that was the actual amount that they had discussed in those emails. I'm not sure those emails were ever fully released to the public. Again, it's been a year and a half since they were even mentioned in court documents and depositions, but I believe the understanding was a 50-50 split on revenue for the comic itself from stores. But you got to remember, that's a 50-50 split on revenue from the comics going to local comic shops. This is after the GoFundMe had created the independent, or not the GoFundMe, the Indiegogo campaign had independently funded a run. This was a second run. We're talking a much lower amount. And obviously we can't predict exactly how much that would be, which would be a problem going into the courtroom. So now what we're looking at is tortious interference that could be as low as $25,000 to $50,000 for Richard Meyer. And mind you, this case at this point has already cost somewhere north of $100,000 for him. So $25,000 to $50,000 reward. Even if they were able to get treble damages by claiming exemplary damages, something they argued, as they said, Mark Waid, made his statements maliciously with the intent to harm Richard Meyer, and that could lead to treble damages in the jurisdiction. Even when we get to there, we're talking maybe breaking even on legal fees. And the question of whether or not Richard Meyer would be able to recoup those fees from Mark Waid is far from certain. Some people would suggest that is an unlikely outcome. I mean, it's certainly possible a judge could decide to award legal fees in a case like this, but that is not a certainty. So at some point, you have to look at, potentially upwards of $150,000 or even more, I don't know, being put into this lawsuit for an ultimate outcome that might approach $150,000 back. Now, I know people out there believe that Richard Meyer has some sort of obligation to carry the sword of crusade against the comic book industry and slap down Mark Waid, and it would be lovely if he were able to do that. However, the practicality of doing it and the expected return just might not be enough. And that might be why they went ahead and decided to end this lawsuit. And remember, Mark Waid has to have the same sort of conclusion, that this lawsuit will end up costing him more than any potential victory in court would if he were to prevail. And that could include fees as well if the case were found to be frivolous and thrown out. Although that seems very, very unlikely. The case does seem to have at least a facial merit to it. And I frankly believe that Richard Meyer could have won the case. But what is victory if that victory doesn't at least return to you the investment you put in? And so, pursuing with this case looked to be very expensive, and it looks like Richard Meyer and Mark Waid decided against that. Now, they have no explanation. They have signed non-disclosure agreements. They absolutely cannot talk about what the settlement is. We can only speculate. And I would suggest that the settlement is somewhere between nothing, just a walk-away settlement. You've each incurred a massive amount of legal fees, so now's the time to walk away. Or it could be some pittance amount from Mark Waid. Technically, it could be a pittance amount from Richard Meyer as well, where they paid some sort of agreed-upon amount in their non-disclosure agreement, and then or in their settlement agreement that is under non-disclosure, and then walked away. We will never know. My thoughts on this is that Richard Meyer ultimately comes out ahead. And that is reflected in the career he has built since filing this lawsuit. He's had several successful crowdfunding campaigns. No other comic professionals have been able to, if they even are trying, to take down his crowdfunding campaigns to interfere with his business of selling comics to people who want to buy them. That is a much better place than Richard Meyer was in 2018 when he was summarily removed from the comics industry. Now Richard Meyer is making comics. He is selling comics. People seem to be buying and enjoying them. They're doing rather well. And there's a lot to be said about that. And I think the lawsuit itself has a big impact on that. It has a big impact on that. If nothing else, at the beginning, it sent a lot of people to support him, to buy his product, and it exposed him to a lot of people who might not have otherwise had the opportunity to buy what he's producing. And there is a lot of value in that. The question is, will he be able to sustainably convert some of those new eyes to his products into people who enjoy buying the content he's producing? And largely that answer to that question has been yes, and may continue to be yes into the future. There's no way we'll know, and until we just watch what happens. He is also still on YouTube as Comics Matter with your boy Zach. The link to that will be in the description as well. Go check out what he's doing on YouTube. Go check out his campaigns for comics, and if you like it, buy it. Again, this lawsuit presented an opportunity to get a lot of eyes on Richard Meyer who might not have known who he was, and there is a ton of value in that. And everybody who supported him during the lawsuit helped make that happen. I know some people might feel like they didn't get value out of their support, and that really depends on what your goals are. But if your idea was to support Richard Meyer in a time when he was unjustly removed from the comics industry, mission accomplished. You did it. And he couldn't have done it without you. So that's something that people need to keep in mind if they do happen to be upset about this in any way, that there was a ton of value in what happened, and ultimately very good things came out of this lawsuit. And this is pretty... One final note on lawsuits and settlements and judgments. Somewhere around 98 to 99% of legal claims get settled in one way or another. Even legal claims that are filed get settled at a rate of something like 85+%. Settlement is the outcome in the majority, overwhelming supermajority of cases, because the ultimate result is that going to court ends up costing a lot. The risk is high. The reward can be high. But even after you win, let's hypothetically say that Richard Meyer had gotten a judgment against Mark Waid, and let's say it was some sort of miracle top-end judgment, $150,000 to $200,000. He then has to spend the next several years attempting to collect that judgment from a guy who's 1,000 miles away in California. He has to enter the California jurisdiction. He has to get permission there to lodge the judgment in California, and then pursue the judgment collection techniques that California has against Mark Waid. That costs more money, more time, and more emotional investment in something that happened in 2018, the beginning of 2018. When all this happened was actually, considerably earlier than when the lawsuit was filed. I believe it was filed in October. September 19th, 2018. It's right in front of me. But all this stuff happened in something like March or April of 2018. So we're talking 2.5 years have gone by since these events have happened. And that stuff tends to kind of weigh on you, that you've been in a fight for a very long time. And if Meyer had gone on to win, he would go on to win in a year to 2 years to even 3 years. There would be the potential of appeals following any victory, which would cost, another $50,000 to $100,000. And then you've got the collection of the judgment, that could last, frankly, a lifetime, especially if the comics industry tanks and Mark Waid loses his income in any significant way. And if during this time he's been successfully planning and reallocating his income and his assets to be, sort of protected, it could get really, really difficult to actually extract a judgment from Mark Waid. So these, Richard Meyer was looking at the prospect of another, anywhere from 1 to 5 years even for total resolution on this, for something that happened back in March or April or May, whenever it was, of 2018. This gets to be a really, really long, really tiring process. Whereas 7 to 8 years from now, Richard Meyer could get a piece of paper saying that he has justice, right? Well, I mean, I guess that would be after collecting judgment. But he's already gotten the justice that he needed. He's already gotten it. People know Mark Waid's a scumbag. People have seen Richard Meyer and are buying his products, and he has been able to create something out of this disaster. And that is a very desirous victory for Richard Meyer. I know he won't be able to say anything like that. I don't know if he sees it as a victory. It doesn't really matter. For me, watching this from the outside, what Richard Meyer has built after being taken down by Mark Waid is a resounding success. And what Mark Waid has lost from this, to me, is also a success for Richard Meyer. But that's just my opinion. I hope you guys have liked this breakdown of what has happened, my thoughts on it. If you do, click like, hit share, subscribe to the channel if you're not. And I will see you guys soon. Sorry for the long video, but this one needed a decent amount of explanation. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a good day. Peace. Peace.